An agentic process represents a sequence of tasks that must be executed to achieve a specific result. These tasks may involve interactions with users, artificial intelligence agents, and external tools. These processes are organized as a logical flow that can be initiated by an end-user action or by the availability of the result produced by a task. As an example, let's build a process that connects two previously generated agents. The first one resolves a query about topics related to online courses, and the second one takes that content and translates it into the target language selected by the user. In addition, the result should be saved in a Google document and sent to the user via email. We then access the lab and choose the project to work on. First of all, we see the agents, Training Research Assistant, which provides support to the training team, and the Expert Translator agent that translates content into any language and saves it in a Google document. Okay, to create the process, we select the Agentic Processes option and choose New Process. We name it Multi-Language Training Agent and describe it as an agent that translates queries related to the teaching of online courses into any language. We click on Save. Here is where we will design our process flow. By default, it includes a start node in the center of the screen that represents the beginning of the interaction. We click on the Start node, and the Properties panel is displayed on the right side of the screen. We must indicate the name and type of signal. The user option means that the process is started by an action triggered by the user, while artifact means that the process is triggered by the creation of a specific artifact. And what do we mean by artifact? An artifact is the result produced by a task within the process. It can be, for example, a document, a response generated by an agent, or any other type of structured content that represents a deliverable within the process flow. In our example, we want the user to be able to enter a query, so we specify user. And we need to define a process variable to store that query. For that, if we select the process name, we can edit its detail and also the variables. We define then the user question variable of string type. In our example, we indicate user input as the name of the signal and user in the type drop-down list. Okay, the next step is to add a task. A task in an agentic process represents a unit of action that is executed as part of the overall flow. It can involve different activities such as invoking an agent, requesting information from the user, executing an external tool, processing data, or generating an artifact as output. Note then that when we hover the cursor over the start block, 4 anchor points appear around it. In turn, when hovering over any of them, we see a context menu. We choose Task to add a new task node to the process. This task represents the first action to be executed once the process is activated. The Properties panel that allows us to configure the task details opens automatically. It is also possible to add a task by dragging it from the toolbox at the bottom left edge. Next, we need to configure it. Each task can have inputs, such as artifacts generated by previous tasks or user data. And it can also have outputs, such as new artifacts or actions that trigger subsequent tasks. To configure the task, then, we must fill in the fields available in the Properties panel. We must indicate a name, and in our example, we enter Agent Response. Then we must select the agent that we want to invoke. By clicking on Select, we see the agents previously defined in the current project. In our case, we choose Training Research Assistant, which will be the agent that will use this task to answer the user's query about online training. We then fill in the fields of the task that allow defining its function precisely and combine it with the capabilities of the selected agent. We also indicate a description. For example, provides information on the structure and dynamics of online courses. Next, as the context of the task, we can include relevant information such as details of the overall process or considerations that the agent must take into account. In our case, we can include that this task is part of a training team workflow. In the instructions box, we should indicate clear guidelines for the agent to execute the task. For example, receive the user's query and return a clear, well-structured, professional-level response. You can use bold, italics, and bullet points to structure the response. The examples allow defining input-output pairs that help the agent understand the type of output expected. To add an example, we click on Add. And while this is an optional section, it is recommended to include at least one example when the output must follow a specific structure or formatting style. Then we have the task inputs. Here we can indicate an artifact that works as input if the task requires working with some previously generated content. In our case, we indicate user question as input, which corresponds to the variable with the content provided by the user when activating the process. Since this is the initial material to be processed, it must be configured as the task input. As for outputs, this is a field that ensures that the task generates an output that can then be used in subsequent tasks of the process. In our example, the output can be an article or similar item containing the agent's response. We specify an artifact named response content. Okay, we have completed the definition of this task. To continue with the process, we must add a new task following the same procedure we have just seen. This new task will use the expert translator agent to translate the article into the target language indicated by the user. We then select the agent and indicate Translate Training Document as the name for the task. As description, we say that it translates an article into the target language indicated by the user. As context, we can say that this task is executed after obtaining an answer for the initial query. Its goal is to make the content accessible in the indicated language while maintaining its structure and readability. In the instructions, we indicate that it must translate the content provided into the target language, final language, and it must keep the format and structure. In addition, the result must be clear, professional, and easy to read. We also indicate that it should save the translated content in a Google document and send it to the user via email. It is worth noting that this final language syntax refers to a process variable that must be defined as we did before. Remember that the instructions indicated here are integrated with the instructions indicated in the agent itself. Okay, the input of this task is given by the output of the previous task. That is by the artifact response content. And as for the output of this task, we are going to indicate a new artifact named Translated Content. Well, we could now simply add a finish node to end the process. But instead, we are going to define an intermediate step by adding an event node before finishing. An event node acts as an intermediate pause within the process and can be triggered by the generation of a specific artifact or by a user action. In this case, we set the user type, which means that the process will wait until the end user confirms that they want to continue with the next step. In the example, we want the user to confirm the end of the process. So we add a node of event type and open the properties panel that allows defining the event that will trigger the next action. We add a descriptive name, for example, translation is ready. As already mentioned, in the type field, we select user. Now, to complete the process, we add a finish node after the event. At this point, we are ready to test the behavior of the process from the end user's perspective. At the bottom, we press Run Test, and the test panel opens where we will simulate the interaction with the Agentic process. We complete the subject with a title or short description. We make a query, for example. What is currently the best platform for teaching online courses? And we indicate Italian as the language to translate. Once the fields are completed, we click on Run to start the execution of the process. Note that the running task is highlighted. It processes the first task, moves on to the second task, and stops when it reaches the event node. At this point, the process waits for the user's confirmation to continue. As we can see, a Translation is Ready section appears with a Send button next to it. To continue and complete the process, we must click on the Send button. This confirms that the translation is ready and activates the next step of the flow, which in this case is to reach the finish node. We see the document that was emailed to us to the account indicated in the parameters of the Google Drive Tools configuration. We have tested and validated the process, so we click on Publish to publish it. The execution of a process with all its stages and status is recorded in the Global Enterprise AI backoffice. We access the corresponding project and choose the Processes option. Here we see the record of all the process execution instances with their name, subject, cost, duration, start and end date and time. If we select one of these entries, we can see its general information, the artifacts involved, and the history of activities. Here we can view the steps recorded in each activity, and also its debug.